Hello, this is the Harboring Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative perspective about the world around me. Feedback is immensely important. Feel free to reach out. The two ways to do this is through email and YouTube. Appreciate all you listeners out there. Thank you so much. And I'm on a lot of different platforms, so it won't be hard to find me. So let's get into the topic here, the topic of choice. Since it's Friday, guess what? I'll focus on all of you. And so last week I focused on the earlier part of the history of German literature. And I'm going to continue it out and talk about modern German literature from the 20th century. Here we go. Alright, so this one will probably be, short and sweet here, but, play it by ear. So, as I said, that the reason why I focus on the 20th century, because the 20th century is a really good capstone, corner point for, relaying into what we see going on today. And literature in itself is a good way to tap in, for us, a way of getting into the social and cultural issues of each time period. Now, Germany, it was, just at the forefront of that, Now, Expressionism was, really prominent through the art form. Writing in itself is an art form, but traditionally with oils and paints and stuff, with the screen, for instance, that really the anguish and the details of the color choices and the brush strokes and everything really express the aspects of the anxiety of what the painting is supposed to relate to the viewer. Now, let's see how all of these different concepts translate themselves into literary context. Here we go. Okay, so as I mentioned before, the source that I'm reading from will be provided for you. So, I always make sure I keep the sources that I'm reading from available for you all, because this is a good way where you can keep in touch and know, and if you want to read further on, know more about, if you want to learn more and so forth, you get all of that good stuff for you. Alright, so let's get into it here. Okay, it says so let's start out with Expressionism, as I was saying. So German modernism emerged from the turn of the 20th aestheticism. So like European modernism as a whole, German modernism is in fact a cluster of different literary movements, including Expressionism, the new objectivity, and Dada. Now, as I mentioned before about the aspects of how I was going on and talking about this on the last term with the European movements here, and then especially with the aspects of expressing through art form. It's another example with Dada and all of this, when World War II was in its midst and people finding their way into, when I was getting into Dutch and when I was getting into the Scandinavian, territory about literature and everything, they used the arts as a means to escape all the brutality of the Great War of Second War here. And so let's see how that seeps into the aspects again with literature. So of these, expressionism, it is best known and most important. So beginning about 1910, so this is in the era of when the First Great War was happening here. So expressionism was a powerful response to the chaos and suffering of modern life. Now Gregor Him, and Godfrey Ben created terrifying images of war and urban life and oppression. Now, and illness in their literary poetry. Good job, baby. And although Terrico expressed a visionary mysticism in his battlefield scenes, Him and Ben presented reality as a grotesque, distorted, and starkly unrevolved. So at the same time, the poetry, like expressionist art of the period, is full of such colors as red, gold, purple, and blue. Now, as I also mentioned before in a previous podcast, there's a lot of, let's case in point, when I talked about in March about green, the impact and the symbolism that green has in our culture and in our broad here. Typically, when you see these symbols, especially in nature, they're very significant. Now, when you relay that in, that's also a power symbol of how it impacts the viewer. And so these subtle things also translating themselves into a literary form is really significant of how much of an impact it is brought upon each generation too. Okay, excuse me. Alright. Okay, baby. At the same time, the poetry, like expressionism and art of the period, is full of such, as I said, the different color schemes here are often they are very deeply personal or significant for these writers. So the anthology, which was released in 1919, The Dawn of Humanity, was edited by Kirk Punnis, and it was a rich and very influential collection of expressionist poetry. So an expressionist drama used the same methods of grotesque distortion to attack what it saw as the soulness of modern technology and a subjection of workers to machines. Yet expressionist drama often took a more optimistic approach to the machine age, in part because of the impulses derived from the Italian futurism. Whereas futurism glorified machines, however, the expressionists saw it as more of an instrument that might help bring about a socialist utopia. So you see how all these ideologies too, and to make a comment about this, really shapes worldviews, right? So what am I saying about this? So here we go with futurism, here we go with socialist and utopia. So socialist utopia contradicts itself because, yes, okay, if we're going to be very honest, there are some good points. There can be some good points with socialism, when it's really not with bad faith characters here. A case in point, a really prevalent point of how we use socialist programs in American politics or American government is Social Security, right? But at the same time, you can see how these clashing ideas made it very possible and open for bad players to come about and perverse it. Case in point, here we go with Adolf Hitler and his power and his reign that's coming to play in this time period here. And so going on to futurism with the aspects of the Italian point of view about the Industrial Revolution and the age of factories and so forth, and moving on to modernity, it's quite interesting how the aspects that you can say sort of like a in between patriotism for the work and the pride of what you do is a very different turning point in the aspects of how that thing that as machinery, when we get into war and all these things, is viewed in Germany at this time. Quite interesting. So the expressionist stage became a vehicle to effect transformation of consciousness in the audience. So Die Wandering of 1919 and Transfiguration, a play by Ernest Toller, depicts this man of transformation into a young man who turns his horrific war experience into a new awareness of the brotherhood of man. Now his play, the Mesquite, which was in 1920, and The Man in the Masses, presents the tragic attempt of a woman worker to effect a mass revolution among her fellow workers and lead them beyond violence towards peaceful coexistence. Now the dramas Gas 1 in 1918 and Gas 2 in 1920 by Gregory Kaiser, it showed how a group of gas production workers are enthralled in their attempt to gain control of technology and establish a workers' utopia and a brotherhood of peace. Now you see how this is very clear, the turning points of how things, when you have something that is, people feel uproot, they feel like they need to uproot, they don't feel like they're being heard, oppression, all these kind of things. Mix that in. You see how that relays itself in very different formats to overthrow something. Now it's quite different when you get into the aspects of now, in case in point, where there's not really some, turning point of issues. Now in the times that we live in, it's more time for people to be more enlightened and progress. But there's people, bad fake characters, that, and then the mainstream media push the agenda that times are more worse than it's ever been. You get this sense of reality that's not balanced, and that destructs the progression of a culture. And so that also begs the question of how this is, what are the powers that be gatekeepers of media? What are they really talking about in the effect of our society? Are they really anarchists, or what's going on? So a really good example of this is President Trump with his move with Iraq, Iran, all these things. Now, it's one of those things that's dang if you do, dang if you don't, sort of that mentality. Because, he had to be very extreme in order to get them to come to the turn of the table. But at the same time, when he said, okay, so you already came to the table, so that deal is off, let's come to a resolution here. Hold on. He's seen as he's look how weak our president is. So where pay attention to stuff like that. What that really says a lot. So here we go. I'm gonna get on to more. So the 50s and 60s. So in the other German speaking, hey, why don't you get sparkling in the can? There's sparkling water in the can. Get that for your dad right quick, okay? It's upstairs. It won't be hard to find it. It's in cases on the floor. Okay, so let's jump ahead to the 50s and 60s. So it says in the German-speaking countries in the late early 50s and 60s, it saw the emergence of a number of novelists whose work have since been contemporary classics. So in Switzerland, Max Fisk explored the problem of the guilt in his novel Homo Faber. So Homo Faber is the story of an engineer who becomes a modern opiate. And Stiller, I'm Not Stiller, about a man who refuses to take responsibility for his past. Now, in West Germany, we get the Henrik Boll produced the ballad Halb hin in 1959 and the Ballads of Half Past Nine, which is a brilliant novel according to this source, and several voices that placed two generations of Germans off against each other as they look back at Nazism. So at the same time, Gunter Grass, perhaps the most important writer of the period, later in 1999, winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature, began to publish what eventually became known as the Danzig trilogy, consisting of Die, which is entitled The Tin Drum, and the Casting Mouse, where, with those very elaborate here cartoons, and that is in itself going into the aspects and making commentary about socialist power. Well, we again with World War II, with Nazism here. And it's very clever because, it's unassuming, because when you look at it over, you think, from a surface point of view, oh, this must be for children. But at the same time, it's very adult in the content. And that's very interesting how that all laid itself out here. All right, so, which eventually became, okay, I got that. So the trilogy presents a grotesquely imaginative retrospective of the Nazi period, and the narrative of the Die Blinzel is the Dorf Oscar Metaroth, who claims that he deliberately stopped growing on his third birthday out of protest against the corruptions of the adult society under Nazi regime. So he oppresses oppression by means of his toy drum. Alright, so 70s and 80s. So the 1970s were marked by an inward turning that became known as the new subjectivity. So the dominant genre was lyric poetry of this time period. So, mostly. So, its authors have formerly been involved in the student revolution from 67 to 68, which had called for a new politicization of literature in the face of Vietnam War. So, in the problems of the third world. So, with this is the problems of the third world. So, after the student movements died down, the young writers returned. Okay, baby. So after the student movement died down, the young writers returned somewhat reluctant to everyday domesticality, which they described in their poetry in a affectionate detail. So although also with a distinct touch of irony with this. So the new subjectivity is documented in the Urich Theobology of the anthology. So 77 is this is in insert form from it. It says, "And yet I move," and poems before and after 1968. So in the novel, the turn inward was powerfully presented by Peter Handke, which is in the autobiographical works such as The Dear Kurtz and Brief zum Land Abschied in 72. This was an account of an American tour that is also about the collapse of his marriage and all of this. So it's very sensitive in the portrayal of his mother and also, taking of her life. Now in East Germany, where the official socialists lie still, the subjectivity and inwards, Christoph Wolff brilliantly explored the problems of according to the source of interterritoriality in her novel, The Nacken der Uber, which is the quest for Christy T. It's a meditation about meditating about a dead friend who is in essence the alter ego of the narrator. Okay, so also we get in the aspects of the feminist movement, coming out in the 70s here. And then you get postmodernism. So postmodernism. So in the last decades of the 20th century, Germany literature was influenced by international postmodernism and a movement that combined the homogeneous elements in order to appeal to similarly to a popular and more sophisticated reader. So parodies and multiple allusions to other types of cultural productions of this. So examples: the flounder, the rat. So and the which they're convoluted in the insections and their narratives, lyrics, which interludes recipes for favorite German dishes and the reversions of fairy tales, and the ironic representations of contemporary feminism. And it was quite interesting how you can see how this can play itself out, from case in point, let's go to Disney, right? Now, when, what's her name? And before that became a thing, Snow White, with all the controversy with the lead actress. I can't even remember her name because, I can't, it's hard for me to process people names who do such ridiculous things, personally to me, who do ridiculous things. And it's like, okay, I think, Rachel Zegler, okay? And so she said, why, my whole issue is, like, if you're going to take on a role, why are you trying to be really at the heart of it, being an anarchist by throwing it down? But it's this whole thing, you want to pretend like you want to honor the role, but at the same time you want to spit on it when it has a very tradition. So anyway, my point about bringing this up is, she said that the story point of Snow White, with the prince, stalking her, and all this, this whole turning point of a love story. We don't want to do that this time. She's going to be a female boss, and it just, her offending a lot of people, and then it's just, and then them trying to have normal sized people being dwarfs when they could just, they want to say inclusion for everything when they could have just just a cultural revolution of people who are dwarfs, supporting their community and having them work and being at the center front for this, instead of having CG'd animated, and that's a disrespect and a spit at them, when you have live action real people who are dwarfed, all that, little people working at the front point. And so my point about bringing all this out, it's quite interesting how this is relating itself, and how we can see how cornerstones mark the territory for, from my point of view. You can argue these points of what can come out and leak in the forefront. It's quite interesting because in itself, Walt Disney said that he wanted to take, subject matters, fairy tales, that could be, depending on the circumstance, a lot to ingest for the general audience. So let's take, it can be very adult subject matters and make it time for anybody to watch, and how these things with contradicting itself and taking a stab at itself and having all these symbolisms and everything interlacing itself now when it's talking about this whole aspects of fairy tales and so forth, and from a German postmodernism point of view, is quite interesting. So 21st century. So in the mid-90s, a new generation of writers emerged who finally provided the reunification of novels that critics have expected immediately after the fall of the Berlin Wall. So out of this, we get about the aspects of, in other novels in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, about about the past continues to haunt the German writings right? And recounts of everything, but trying to make things anew and a different perspective of everything. So, I mean, it's just one of those things, case in point, I'm going to end on this. So, the story of Lot and his family and his wife. So, it's a really good turning point for now to see this. So, it was Lot's wife was specifically told with Sodom and Gomorrah, do not turn around, because if you turn around, you turn into a pillar of salt. She didn't listen. She turned around. There you go. So why did I bring this up? You can see the context on the wall with that is, if you take the time to look so much in the past or look behind you, that can hinder you from being present and looking onward. And that's something that needs to be relayed and understood when we go on in other contexts about our culture as of today, and then specifically the culture of Germany as of today. Yes, there has been brutality and horrible injustices that has happened. Now, this is something that globally happens, and from a North American point of view, American territory of as Americans has happened too. But what is very important to remember here, and especially when we get into the aspects of literature and people making their accounts for everything, it's important to remember, what has these people done lately to move forward and move ahead in the present? Is it still the same way? No, it's not. Is there progress? And nothing's perfect, but there's still progress. Okay, that's something to look at and think about when we get in the context of everything else. So with this said, this reaches the end. And as I said, it's very important for y'all. I mean, it's very important for me, but, take it for what you will. I appreciate feedback, so feel free to reach out. Comments are greatly appreciated on YouTube. And also, I take the time to read emails and so forth. So feel free to reach out to me. All right, so this reaches the end. Tune in, absolutely turn up, and take care. Bye-bye for now.